Witkoff visit comes at a crucial time. How important is U.S. involvement in ensuring that the ceasefire holds, sir?
Well, as you've mentioned, actually, it's a very important visit because it comes just a few days ahead of the supposed beginning of the negotiations over the second stage, which is according to the agreement signed between Hamas and Israel. Those negotiations over the second stage should start on the 16th day of the first phase of the ceasefire. As you know, the second stage is going to be very difficult and complicated, both because of the need for Israel to withdraw all its troops from Gaza Strip and reach a permanent ceasefire, as well as the release of a distinguished number of prisoners, including army soldiers and officers. So, I mean, again, with all the doubts about the intentions of the Israeli prime minister and his extremist ministers, I mean, there are a lot of fears and doubts that these negotiations will be easy or smooth, or that Israel will not exploit them to violate the agreement and resume the war after the initial stage of 6 weeks or 42 days.
Mr. Khaled, in your answer, you mentioned the second phase of the ceasefire. How did you read, sir, the first stage that was supposed to be taking place or is taking place as we talk now?
Well, I mean, again, we've already seen some Israeli attempts to sabotage this agreement when the Palestinian side, Hamas, did not release one of the Israeli hostages that the Israeli prime minister insisted on her release, claiming that she's a civilian and not a military person. And for that reason, Israel delayed the return of Palestinians to their homes for almost 2 days. And we saw the reaction of the Palestinians the minute this issue was solved, and this Israeli hostage is supposed to be released on Thursday, tomorrow. Then we saw an unprecedented flood of human beings walking on their foot back to their homes, even though they know that they are destroyed and basically nothing but trouble. So,
Dr. Khaled, and do you see that the deployment of Lebanese army is slow? Sorry, I'm mentioning Lebanon in this context as a ceasefire, but do you think that it's slow at this point?
Well, I mean, again, you draw a comparison to Lebanon, which is again over.
Or is it just an excuse?
I mean, again, it's the case in Lebanon offers a very good example of how Israel can procrastinate and try to avoid implementing the agreements, because according to the agreements with Lebanon, the Israeli army was supposed to fully pull out from the occupied areas in South Lebanon by Sunday. I mean, again...
Thank you, sir. This is the point I wanted to nail, and I nailed it. Thank you very much, sir. Sir, the Netzarim corridor has become a focal point of Witkoff's visit. What does this area symbolize in the broader context of the post-war Gaza, and how significant is the return of displaced Palestinians in light, of course, sir, of the statements that, of course, you heard by U.S. President Donald Trump?
Well, let me first of all point out that another reason why Witkoff visit to Israel today and to Gaza is important, because he's also preparing for the scheduled meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister, which is supposed to take place in Washington on February 4th.
On the 4th, sir, and it's supposed to be the first visit to Washington by any official that's...
My sentence, please. I mean, again, so this is a reason why the U.S. President has issued an unprecedented invitation for the Israeli Prime Minister to become the first leader that he would meet after becoming the U.S. President. So again, that's another reason why the Witkoff visit is very important, beside negotiations or assuring the launch of the negotiations over the second stage. And at the same time, you refer to the Netzarim corridor. The Netzarim corridor sounded like a fortification that would never be removed after 15 months of war between Israel and Hamas. So the removal of the Netzarim corridor is an indication of the extreme failure of the Israeli military campaign over the past 16 months. Because at the end of the day, they had to dismantle the Netzarim corridor. And again, part of the tricky questions, or part of the thorny questions that remain, is the future of the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza, as well as the the full withdrawal of the Israeli troops. So these are among the remaining issues that are going to be very important to work on at the next stage. And indeed, the statements that you are referring to that were made by the U.S. President Donald Trump actually sounded more like a sabotage of the agreement, which his own personal envoy had agreed to, because at the time, this ceasefire agreement speaks about 3 stages, speaking about moving from one stage to the other, and the third stage being devoted to reconstruction. Here we have a totally different proposal from the U.S. president suggesting to move the Palestinians, 1.5 million people, to both Gaza and Jordan. So that's why, again, that's a very worrying sign from the new administration, reflecting rather a mentality that doesn't appreciate the core reason for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which is over land. It's not over living nicely or living in nice resorts overlooking the sea, as Mr. Trump has indicated. It's about the right to self-determination, which is lacking totally from the proposal that Trump has made recently. Because again, if it's up to the Palestinians, we've seen their reaction. They want to go back to their homes, even if they are totally destroyed, and they don't want to go anywhere else. So, I mean,
Mr. Khaled, how do you, what's your take, your narrative, and how do you assess Witkoff's visit at this point of the ceasefire, sir? And do you see any reasons behind, and if there are any reasons, are they in the sake of the Palestinians or the Gaza, or the sake of the U.S., or for whose sake, sir? Or the ceasefire?
Again, Witkoff was very influential in reaching the agreement that was being negotiated in Doha, Qatar, with the participation of senior Egyptian officials as well as American officials. And as you know, I mean, this was a joint effort that included the former Biden administration, which has failed over almost a year to reach a ceasefire agreement. So again, the presence of Witkoff and his influence on the Israeli prime minister is a very important factor if we are going to see this agreement reaching its conclusion as planned and as stated by the parties who signed it. So, I mean, the hope is that the Israeli prime minister, when he goes to Washington, will have some concrete plans to discuss with the U.S. president outside of this framework that Mr. Trump has suggested over the deportation of the Palestinians. And the hope was, according to Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and the Jordanian king, was that the ceasefire agreement would be a first step towards restarting final peace negotiations in order to establish a Palestinian state and not to totally exclude this demand by the Palestinian people. And that's why it's very important for the Egyptian and the Arab leaders to keep in close touch with the new U.S. President Trump to affirm that what they want is a Palestinian state and not the deportation of Palestinians living in Gaza to either Egypt or to Jordan.
Okay, sir, beyond the immediate ceasefire, there are discussions about the long-term political future of Gaza. What, in your point of view, are the scenarios, sir, that are being considered, and how realistic are they?
Well, again, it's a very complicated situation. We're hardly almost 11 days into the initial phase of the ceasefire agreement, and the hope is that we reach the conclusion of this first stage after 6 weeks and then move to the second stage. It's all very complicated issues due to the insistence of the Israeli government, and particularly Mr. Netanyahu and his extremist ministers such as Smotrich and Ben Gvir, that Hamas should never be back in control of Gaza, while at the same time not offering any clear alternative. The Israeli Prime Minister said he doesn't want Hamas, he doesn't want the Palestinian Authority to run the Gaza Strip.
Exactly. Dr. Khaled, I want to seize the opportunity before I wrap up this segment with you, sir, to ask you, Netanyahu's government remains divided on Gaza's future. How do internal Israeli politics affect the ceasefire stability? And I also want to ask you, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza remains severe. What role does the ceasefire play in improving conditions, and what obstacles remain, sir? In 10 seconds, because I have to wrap up this segment, sir.
Yeah, we just have the Israeli government first. I mean, the Israeli government, one of the main reasons why Mr. Netanyahu did not want to stop the war is because he basically wanted to keep his own coalition intact. He knows that this state of war increases his popularity and mobilizes part of the Israeli public. So, I mean, again, most observers and analysts agree that Netanyahu did not want this ceasefire to come into effect because it will also open the door for accountability over the failure of the Israeli government and the Israeli Prime Minister to prevent the October 7th attack. But at the same time, this is not the only challenge facing the Israeli Prime Minister. There are other very critical issues that might lead to the downfall of the government, starting with the recruitment of the religious Jewish Zionists who are known as the Haredim. That might be one reason that might lead to the fall of the government, differences over the budget and differences over the role of the judiciary. These are all issues that Netanyahu did not want to delve into because by continuing the war, he can postpone any other issues. But due to the ongoing ceasefire, now all those issues are being opened and discussed. And one of the that many observers refer to is the possibility that this government falls down and we might see new Israeli elections during this year. And this